Welcome to the third edition of the Getting Started with Access MyMachine OPC UA video series. In this video, we're going to dig into the server configuration. We're going to begin with the network architecture of the SINUMERIK control, and then move on to an example company network configuration. In a couple different scenarios, we'll discuss a CNC only configuration, as well as a CNC and Windows PC front-end configuration. After that, we're going to discuss the OPC UA server settings within the operate environment, and then the server authentication settings. Finally, we're going to test the server with UaExpert in a couple different configurations, first as a remote server via the company network, and then using the MyVirtual Machine virtual server. As you may recall from the first Unlocking the Power of OPC UA with SINUMERIK Controls webinar, there are a couple different use cases for the SINUMERIK OPC UA server. The first use case that we're going to consider is the virtual use case. So in this scenario, we have create or run MyVirtual Machine that is hosting our OPC UA server, and on that same Windows PC that is running our MyVirtual Machine application, we also have an OPC UA client. The next use case would be the local use case. So in this scenario, we have a PC front end on our machine tool, and the OPC UA client is running on that PC front end. The final use case is perhaps the most common. This is the network use case. So in this scenario, we can have either a PC front end on our machine tool, or we can have a CNC only. And in this case, our OPC UA client connects over the network to our machine tool. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to focus mostly on the network implementation, as that's the most common. However, at the end, we're also going to come back to this virtual scenario where we will make a connection with an OPC UA client to the MyVirtual Machine application using the loopback adapter. Moving on, we're going to talk about the communication concept for numeric control units. SINUMERIK controls have three networks that we need to be aware of, those being the machine network, the field network, and the company network. First, the field network is what we use to connect our inputs and outputs to our control unit. The protocols that we'll use generally are going to be Profibus and Profinet, where Profibus connects to the X126 port on SINUMERIK 1 controls, and our Profinet networks are available on X150, P1, and P2, as well as on X160. Next, the machine network is what we use to connect industrial Ethernet enabled devices to our control. Here you can see an MPP. We can also connect MCPs and our thin clients to the machine network. Optionally, we may also have a Windows front end with a SIMATIC IPC connected to our machine network. Finally, the company network is what we normally use to communicate with the factory. Here, generally, we're going to use the X130 interface, where we can set our subnetwork to whatever we need to in order to facilitate this communication with the existing company network. So moving on, we're going to do an example just of OPC UA. So on this last page, you could see a lot of different interfaces that could be used for different protocols. Here, we're going to solely consider OPC UA with SINUMERIK 1. Now, the OPC UA server is going to be broadcast on the X120, the X127, and the X130 interfaces. If we consider the PLC, there's actually another server and client available that's just for our S7-1500 PLC. We're not going to focus on that in this webinar, but I do want to at least let you know that these ports here, the X150 and the X160, can be used to facilitate communication with our S7-1500 servers and clients. Now moving forward, here on the right, we're looking at a configuration that includes both the CNC and a Windows PC. For this use case, generally we're going to disable the SINUMERIK OPC UA server in the Linux environment, and instead we're going to run that server in the Windows environment. SIMATIC IPCs oftentimes have three different interfaces, those being X1, X2, and X3. In most cases, we will connect X2 to X120 on our SINUMERIK 1 to be part of that machine network, and we're going to reserve X1 for our company network. In the example that we'll do today, we're going to use two configurations, one with the CNC only and one with the CNC plus Windows PC. For the CNC only configuration, we'll use X130 to facilitate communication with the OPC UA server running directly on the control. And for the second example, we're going to use the X1 company network to facilitate the communication with the OPC UA server running in the Windows environment. Now that the network architecture has been reviewed, we're going to move on to an example company network configuration. Here in the lab, I have a demonstration PC that has a wired network interface card. That network interface card is connected through an Ethernet cable to a Scalance X005 Ethernet switch. The P2 interface of my network switch is connected to a SINUMERIK 828D. I'm using the X130 company network. This is the same company network that we talked about for the SINUMERIK 1. So the configuration here is going to be very analogous to what you might do for the SINUMERIK 1 only scenario. We also have a Windows PC front-end system where we have a SIMATIC IPC 427E connected with a physical wire to the X1 company network interface. We have on the back end a SINUMERIK 840D solution line control where the OPC UA server has been disabled within the Linux environment. Now for my wired network interface card on my demonstration PC, I'm going to set up address 192.168.21.251. Now on that subnetwork 192.168.21, I'm going to reserve node 1 here for my CNC only setup with my SINUMERIK 828D, and I'm going to reserve node 2 for my Windows PC front-end system. There's one more connection that I'm going to show you how to make at the end, and that is to MyVirtual Machine. So on the same demonstration PC, we'll boot up, create MyVirtual Machine, and run an OPC UA server from that. We're going to, in this case, use the loopback adapter to facilitate communication with our OPC UA client. Now, the first thing we need to do is set the IP address of the network interface card on the demonstration PC. To do so, we need to view our network connections, right-click on our desired network adapter, and select Properties from the drop-down menu. Then we're going to scroll until we see Internet Protocol version 4, select Properties, and then we're going to set our desired static IP address. I'm going to show you now how I prefer to do that on my PC. So first, I just go to Connections, and here I can view network connections. Then I select the adapter, so I'm going to use my wired network interface card and go to Properties. Here, I select Internet Protocol version 4, select Properties again, and specify the static IP address that I wish to use. Once the IP address of the device which will be running our OPC UA client has been set, the next step is to go in and set the IP addresses of the devices that will be hosting our OPC UA servers. We're going to begin with the CNC only scenario, which includes our SINUMERIK 828D hardware device. For this setup, we're going to set the company network address on the X130 interface to static address 192.168.21.1. To do this, we're going to begin in the diagnostics area, then go to bus TCP/IP, TCP/IP diagnostics, TCP/IP config, and finally change. So walking through this setup, what we're going to do first is make sure that when we go to our setup area in the lower left corner, we see that our current access level is at least user. If it's not, we're going to need to obtain the user password and enter it in the following dialog by selecting password and then set password. Since in this case we already have the access level user, we're going to proceed to the diagnostics area. Within the diagnostics area, first we hit the extension key, followed by bus TCP/IP. Next, we're going to hit vertical soft key TCP/IP diagnostics. We're going to hit vertical soft key to TCP/IP config next. And once we're in here, now we can see that we have two networks. We have the X130 company network as well as the X127 service network. We can see that the default address type is DHCP, and we're going to have to change that to manual. So we'll select the drop-down box and then select manually. We're going to input the static IP address 192.168.21.1, and set the subnet mask to 255.255.255.0. We're going to leave the DNS server as well as the gateway fields blank and let those be calculated automatically for us. Once we've configured this screen, we'll select OK, and we're notified that changes will become effective after reset power on. The best thing to do at this point is to shut down your machine, following your normal shutdown procedure, and then power it back up to apply the changes. Once our CNC-only system comes back up after being power cycled, we can check to be sure that the static IP address of the company network was set as expected. To do so, we'll go to Menu Select, followed by Diagnostics. We'll hit the extension key again and select Bus TCP/IP, followed by TCP/IP Diagnostics. In this case, we can see already that the X130 network has the static IP address that we specified, 192.168.21.1. So we're all set and ready to proceed to setting the IP address of our Windows front-end system. So moving forward, we're going to use the same workflow that we did on our CNC-only system to get to our TCP/IP configuration screen within SINUMERIK Operate. Some of you may be tempted to configure your static IP address on the Windows front end using the Windows dialogues. However, I've had a lot better experience personally using the SINUMERIK Operate dialogues to configure this, and I'll show you that in the end, the settings are also reflected in the Windows dialogues. So moving forward here, I have set up for us a SINUMERIK 840D with the IPC 427E front-end system. What we're going to do is first go to Menu Select and then proceed to Diagnostics. Just as was the case on the CNC-only system, we will have to have user-level access to support this procedure. The next thing we're going to do is select the extension key followed by TCP/IP and then TCP/IP Diagnostics. Here, we're going to go to TCP/IP config, and we can see that our PCU company network is currently DHCP. What we're going to want to do is select change. Now we're going to select manually. We're going to put our IP address here at 192.168.21 node address 2 and fill in our subnet mask to be 255.255.255.0. I want to clear out my DNS server fields so that those get calculated automatically for me. And I'm going to clear out my gateway as well, and then select OK. So now that I select OK, again, I see changes will become active after reset PO. What I want to do here is carry out the full machine shutdown sequence and bring it back up to see whether or not our changes are effective. Now that my system is back up, I'm going to check to be sure that my changes were effective. I go again to the diagnostic screen, followed by the extension key and then Bus TCP/IP and TCP/IP Diagnostics. Here I can see that my company network has the address 192.168.21.2, so everything looks good. I mentioned earlier that I would also demonstrate that the network settings that we make within the SINUMERIK Operate environment would also be reflected in the Windows settings. To view the Windows settings on the PC front end, we're going to go to Connections and then right-click on our X1 interface, go to Properties, and then to the IPv4 settings. Here we can see that the network IP address that we specified is set. Just as a reminder, we don't want to use this to set the IP address. Instead, we want to be using the SINUMERIK Operate dialogues. Continuing on, the final thing that we want to do is verify that we can ping from our demonstration PC to the IP addresses associated with the devices that are running the OPC UA servers. So here we have our CNC only device, which was configured at node address 1, and our Windows front-end device, which was configured at node address 2. So to carry out this procedure, what we're going to do is open up a command prompt by typing CMD in our search field. And then we're going to ping 192.168.21.1. We're seeing good results here. So we know that we have made that connection. The next thing we'll do is ping 192.168.21.2. And again, we can see that we are able to ping this device, so we know that the basic communication is working. Now that communication has been established, we're ready to enable the OPC UA server. We're going to start by looking at the OPC UA Server Settings, and we'll begin with our CNC-only example. In order to get to the settings of the OPC UA server that you see here on the right, we're going to have to first go to Setup, then Network, OPC UA Settings, and Change. I'm going to show a demonstration here on the 828D system that we've been configuring. So if you are enabling the OPC UA server for the very first time, the experience that you have is going to be very closely aligned with what you're seeing here. First, you'll have to go to the Setup area. You may next have to hit the extension key, followed by Network, and then OPC UA. If you don't see this OPC UA soft key, the likely reason is that you have yet to enable the P67 license on the licensing page. For further assistance with this topic, please see the first edition of the Getting Started with SINUMERIK OPC UA series. Next, getting into this OPC UA soft key, we can see that the dialog that's come up has shown us that our server status is not yet activated. In order to do that, we're going to have to go to the settings page. Now, if you don't see this change key, it may be because you don't have a high enough access level. In my case, I'm logged in with user access level, and that's sufficient to change the settings. So what I want to do is enable the company network, and I'm also going to enable the service network. These are the two IP addresses that are going to broadcast the OPC UA server that my client's going to be able to connect to. The default TCP port is 4840, so I'm going to leave that. In my case, I'm only going to use the most secure message encryption, so I'm going to uncheck the 128-bit. You can use whichever encryption you need to based on the capabilities of your client. Most importantly, I need to make sure to check this box at the bottom here to activate my OPC UA server. So I'm going to click OK, and I see this message again: changes become active after restart of operate, port changes after control on and off. So I'm going to go ahead and restart operate in order to apply these changes. Moving on, the next example will be for how to set up the OPC UA settings of our PC front-end system. So it's very much the same as what we just looked at. However, we have a couple additional fields here that we could fill in if we cared to. I'll show you the example next of that configuration. So here we have our Windows front-end system, and it has also been just factory reset, so this is going to look a lot like what you see on your real system if you're setting it up for the first time. We're going to go to Setup, followed by Network, and then OPC UA again. Here we see also that it's not yet activated. We're going to go to the Settings screen, followed by Change. Now we can activate it on the company network, as well as on the systems network if we wish to. The default TCP port address of 4840 is going to be good. Again, I'm only going to allow the 256-bit encryption, and I'm going to activate my server by checking the box here. When I click OK, I see that the changes will become effective when I restart operate. So I'm going to make sure to do that and then check back in. So now that I've power cycled both the CNC-only system as well as the PC front-end system, I'm going to go ahead and check to be sure that the OPC UA server has been properly activated. To do that, I'll go to Setup. Then I'll click over to Network and OPC UA. Now here on my CNC-only system that's running on the 828D platform, I can see that my server status is enabled and that it's being broadcast over the two IP addresses over here. We'll look next at the PC front-end system. So with this one, we're going to go again to Setup, followed by Network, and then OPC UA. And here we can also see that the server status is OK, and it is being broadcast over our subnet 192.168.21 node address 2, and port 4840, just like we specified. Now, there's one more configuration that I want to show you, and that is the Create My Virtual Machine configuration. So here, what we're going to do is go again to Setup, and in the Setup area, we'll go to Network. If you've just enabled OPC UA for the first time, you'll see again here that the server status is not activated. To change that, we'll go to Settings and then Change. We definitely want to activate it on the loopback adapter 127.0.0.1. We can use port 4840 if we wish to. If we have any issues, we can always change the port number. That's perfectly okay. Next, we want to make sure that we have at least one of these security policies enabled, so this 256-bit is a good one to use. And I have to make sure that I check the box to activate the OPC UA server. Now when I click OK, it says changes become active after restart of operate, port changes after control on off. I'm going to go ahead and cycle the machine, turning it off here and turning it back on. And when we come back, we'll see whether the OPC UA server has been activated successfully. Now that the virtual machine is back up, we can check to be sure that the OPC UA server was indeed activated. We can do that by going to Setup, followed by Network and OPC UA. Here we can see that the server status is OK and that it is being broadcast over the loopback adapter at the port specified. Now that our OPC UA servers have been enabled, we're going to move on to the OPC UA Server Authentication. The dialog that you see here on the right is the same regardless of whether you're running your OPC UA server in the CNC only environment, the PC front-end environment, or in the MyVirtual Machine environment. So we are only going to go through this section once. The workflow to get to the dialog that you see here is first to go to Setup, then to Network, OPC UA, Authentication, and finally Change. Within this dialog, we're able to set the name of the admin user password, and also configure whether or not we want anonymous access, as well as whether or not we would like to accept certificates automatically. Next, it's important to keep in mind that we do have certain password rules for our admin user password. We have to have at least one uppercase letter, at least one lowercase letter, at least one number, and at least one special character. Finally, passwords must be at least 8 characters long. These password rules were implemented in a later version of the OPC UA server, so if you have an earlier server, you might be able to get away with not following all of these rules. However, for security purposes, my recommendation is that you do follow these rules whether you have to or not. Next, I want to just let you know that there is a lot of supporting documentation for customizing the OPC UA server. The example that we walked through today covers only one scenario, but if you want to do something like DNS-based addressing or really dig into any of the parameters and understand what they mean, you can by clicking on the link just here, which will bring up the following entry. Now, I will be sure to put this in the description of the YouTube video so that everybody can have it. Moving forward, what I want to do next is show you how we configure the authentication. To get to the OPC UA authentication dialog, we first have to go to Menu Select, followed by Setup, then to Network, OPC UA, and Authentication. In this case, we don't see the Change soft key. If this is what you experience as well, the reason could be because your access level is not high enough. On this system, I'm going to hit back until I see the password vertical soft key. I'll click that and then set my password to that which will grant me manufacturer level access. Now with this access level, I can go back to Network, followed by OPC UA, and into the authentication dialog, at which point the change screen is now here. So if I select this, I can now enter my password following the rules that we just discussed moments ago. I do have to enter the password 2 times, and then I'm going to, in my case, not allow anonymous access. If you wish to have that, you'll make sure to check the box just here. I'm also going to accept certificates automatically just to get us started. So now that I have the password set and my username configured, I'm going to click OK. I'm alerted that changes become effective after the restart of operate, port changes after control on and off. Again, I'm going to power cycle the system, and after that, we are going to continue with testing the server with UaExpert. First, I'm going to walk through the slides that detail how to make the connection, and afterwards, I'll show you how to make a connection to the 3 servers that we've just brought into operation. First, in order to proceed, we're going to need the UaExpert client. This can be obtained from the Unified Automation website here. It'll be in the description of the YouTube video for anybody that needs it. Next, once we have the client, we're going to open it up, navigate to the server drop-down menu and click Add. Here, we're going to use Custom Discovery in order to find the server. We'll type in the IP address that we've configured, at which point we'll see the various encryption protocols that we've enabled on our OPC UA server. We're going to click on the one we want, input the password, and then connect. Now, one thing to be very aware of is that we have to be mindful of the case of all of our letters. On SINUMERIK controls, by default, oftentimes caps lock is enabled. So as we're typing in our password within the operate environment, it may be the case that we've accidentally input lowercase when we meant to input uppercase. If this happens when we attempt to connect, it's likely that we'll see this message, bad user access denied. If you do see that message, my recommendation is to go ahead and try using lowercase rather than uppercase, or uppercase rather than lowercase where appropriate. Next, once we make the connection, if we have not yet accepted and trusted the certificates from the OPC UA server on the SINUMERIK control, we're going to have to trust those certificates. Once we do, we'll see this dialog here indicating that the certificate was validated successfully, and then we'll see the address space. Next, we're going to test that the server is actually working by subscribing to a node. In the example here, we've connected to the SINUMERIK server at NCU1 and navigated through the SINUMERIK namespace to the auto jog state node. We've dragged that into our data access view, at which point we can see the data over here on the right. Once we click the reset and auto button on our physical machine, we'll see that the node we've just subscribed to has changed to value 1. Finally, we're going to set up a virtual server as well. So in the UaExpert environment, we can click Add. In this case, when we go to Custom Discovery, we'll type in the address of the loopback adapter, at which point we can then select the encryption protocol that we desire. Now that we've gone through the slideshow detailing how to connect to the servers, we're going to do the real demonstration. After clicking plus, the Add Server dialog will appear. At this point, we can use Custom Discovery to find the OPC UA servers that we've just configured. So I'm going to start with node address 1 and click OK. I can use the drop-down menu here to select the IP address that we've configured, and then select my desired protocol. Next, I'm going to add my username, OPC UA client, and if I wish to, I can also store my password, which I will, and then click OK. Now at this point, I can right-click and connect to my server. We see the certificate validation dialog coming up that we expected. I'm going to trust their certificate and click Continue. And now I'm connected. So the next thing to do is to connect to our PC front-end system. So to do that, I'm going to use Custom Discovery again, and this time I'm going to add the IP address of my PC front-end system. I'll use the drop-down menu to select my desired protocol again. Here, I'm going to use my name and password and click OK. When I go to connect to this server, I see again the certificate validation. I'm going to trust the certificate and click Continue. So now I've made a connection to my PC front-end system. And finally, I want to make a connection to the MyVirtual Machine OPC UA server. So to do that, again, I'll click the plus button. Now on my system, I do have local discovery, so I can already see it here. But in case you don't, you can always use Custom Discovery. So you'll double click, then type the address of the loopback adapter, followed by OK. Now that we have that entered, we can browse. until we find the encryption mode that we'd like. Next, we'll enter our username and password again. And click OK. Now, when I go ahead and attempt to connect to it, I will, for the first time, have to trust the certificate and click Continue. And now I'm able to see the address space of the virtual machine. So just for reference, if you go to Settings and Manage Certificates, you're going to be able to see all the trusted certificates that we've just accepted. Moving on, the next thing we want to do is probably give a more descriptive name to our servers. So here, if I go to my properties, I can call this our CNC only configuration. I can call this one, for example, our PC front end. And finally, I'll call the last one MyVirtual Machine. Now that I have some descriptive names set for my servers, I can browse the namespace and select a node that I wish to monitor. So I'm going to monitor the auto jog state for the CNC only system. On the PC front-end system, I'll also monitor the auto jog state by dragging it into my data access view. And finally, I'll do the same on my virtual machine. So here we just drag it right in. Now, if we were to call up the virtual machine, we can see that as we change between auto mode and jog mode, the value right in this spot here is also changing, so we know that we have successfully made our connection to the OPC UA server and set up the subscription. I hope that you've enjoyed this video series. The follow-up webinar to our first Unlocking the Power of OPC UA with SINUMERIK Controls webinar will be hosted in just a couple weeks. In this upcoming webinar, we'll dig into some of the more nuanced OPC UA topics, such as certificate and user management. I'll also be showcasing an OPC UA C# application that I've mocked up from the S7-1500 OPC UA client source code using the provided .NET helper class. A registration link for this webinar will be posted in the video description. I hope to see you there.